The air inside the slave market was heavy with smoke, oil, and sweat. The lights hung low and flickered weakly, barely bright enough to reveal the faces of those present. Strange creatures from all across the galaxy gathered inside the steel-walled auction hall. They laughed, bargained, and shouted their bids with greed in their eyes. Captain Reel stood near the back of the crowd, watching quietly. He wasn't supposed to be here. He had only docked at this forgotten space station to refuel and buy spare parts for his ship, the Iron Wind. Yet curiosity had led him to the noise of the auction. Slaves were common in the darker parts of the galaxy, but still, something about the shouts and the strange energy of this place drew him in. On the stage, dirty cages held living beings, men, even children from distant planets. They looked scared, defeated, and broken. Some begged for help, others stayed silent, knowing that no one would save them. Then, Reel's eyes caught something unusual. At the far end of the stage stood a girl unlike any other. She wasn't in a cage but was bound in heavy iron chains that wrapped around her neck, wrists, and ankles. Her skin shimmered silver under the weak lights, almost like polished metal, and her long black hair flowed down her back. But it was her eyes that held Reel, still bright, glowing blue eyes that didn't look broken. They looked patient, as if she was just waiting. The auctioneer, a fat alien with slimy green skin, raised his voice louder. "Here we have a personal slave, rare breed. She doesn't speak much, but she follows commands. Perfect for personal services, whatever they may be." The audience roared with laughter and dirty comments. Reel kept watching her. She stood tall despite the chains, showing no fear, no tears, no shame. Unlike the others, she held her head high. She looked more like a queen in chains than a slave. The bidding began. 1,000 credits, shouted a tall alien with sharp teeth and red eyes. 1,500, yelled another, a thick-scaled brute from the Drakel systems. "She be mine." The sharp-teeth alien growled, "I'll break her spirit." The crowd cheered, but Reel's stomach turned at the thought. She was calm, but her fate was about to fall into hands that would crush her. Without thinking, Reel raised his hand. 2,000 credits, he shouted. Suddenly, the room grew quieter. Heads turned to see the human who dared to bid against them. The auctioneer grinned widely. 2,000. That's a heavy bid, human. Anyone else? The sharp-teeth alien snarled, but didn't offer more. His eyes burned with anger, but he backed away, sold to the human. The auctioneer declared with delight, slamming a heavy metal gavel on the podium. Reel stepped forward to the stage, his heartbeat quickening. The auctioneer handed him the control device that unlocked the girl's chains. "Careful with her," the auctioneer said with a sneer. "She's quiet now, but every slave screams eventually." Reel ignored the comment. He walked up to the girl. Her glowing eyes stared into his. There was no gratitude, just curiosity, as if she was trying to understand him. He pressed the button on the device, and the chains fell from her neck and wrists with a heavy clatter. She didn't flinch. She simply stood, her posture perfect, waiting. "What's your name?" Reel asked quietly. She didn't respond. She only watched him. Reel sighed. "Let's go. You're free now." Still silent, the girl followed him off the stage. The crowd watched them, some in anger, others in amusement. A few whispered, wondering why a human would spend so much on a slave only to set her free. When they returned to the Iron Wind, Reel's crew stared in shock. "Captain, what's this?" "She's not a slave anymore," Reel replied firmly. Jonah glanced at the girl, who stood silently, her eyes studying everything. "She doesn't look free." Reel led the girl to a small private cabin. "You'll stay here," he told her. "You're safe now. You're not property. If you want to leave at the next station, you can." Still no answer. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting on her lap, eyes distant but sharp. Before leaving, Real tried again. "What's your name?" She remained silent, her gaze unreadable. Real closed the door gently behind him, frustration and curiosity mixing in his mind. He had no idea who she was, but something deep inside told him this girl was no ordinary slave, and he had just bought himself into a mystery that would change his life forever. Captain Real paced the narrow hallway outside the girl's cabin. It had been 3 days since he bought her from the slave auction. In all that time, she hadn't spoken a single word. She didn't ask questions. She didn't leave the room. She barely touched the food he left for her. Most of his crew had started whispering behind his back, especially Jonah. Jonah caught up with Real near the engine room. "Captain, we need to talk," Jonah said, his tone firm. "That girl. She hasn't said a word. She won't eat properly. And no one knows what she really is." Real crossed his arms. "She's a passenger, that's all." Jonah shook his head. "She was a slave. You saw the mark on her neck. And now she's on our ship, silent as death. What if she's dangerous?" "She's not," Real replied, though even he wasn't sure how he knew that. "I've seen dangerous beings before. She's not one of them." "She could still bring trouble," Jonah muttered. "We're already being followed," Real frowned. "What do you mean?" Jonah sighed. "We picked up a ship tailing us. Silent, dark, but it's there. I checked the sensors myself." Real's eyes narrowed. A shadow ship following them? That wasn't normal. He knew then it had something to do with the girl. Without another word, he marched to her cabin. He knocked softly, then opened the door. She was sitting on the bed, legs crossed, hands resting on her knees. Her glowing blue eyes stared at the wall. Her silver skin reflected the soft light of the room. "You haven't eaten much, Real." Sighed, placing a tray of food on the table. "You need strength." She didn't reply. She just stared ahead, quiet as always. Real sat down on the chair opposite her. He leaned forward. "You've been silent for days. But we're being followed. Now, someone is after you, aren't they?" Her eyes shifted slightly, but she still said nothing. Real sighed. "Look, I didn't buy you to own you. I didn't want to see you in those chains. But if someone is coming for you, I need to know. My crew needs to know." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then she spoke softly, like a breeze through dead air. "You shouldn't have bought me." Real blinked. "Why?" She looked up at him, her eyes glowing faintly. "Because they always find me." "Who?" Real asked. She shook her head. "It doesn't matter. They don't stop." Real leaned closer. "Let me help you." "Tell me who." "They are." She hesitated, then said quietly, "Shadow Collectors." The name chilled Real to his bones. The Shadow Collectors were more myth than truth, an ancient organization that hunted beings of power, lost royalty, and rare creatures across the galaxy. Once they marked someone, they never stopped hunting. "You're running from them?" Real asked. She nodded. "I've been running for years. Every time someone buys me, they find me. Then death follows." Real frowned. "And what about your family? Where are they?" She looked away. "Gone. My people betrayed me, sold me. I was valuable. Now I'm just a prize to be claimed." Her voice was heavy with pain. For the first time, Real saw not just strength, but deep sorrow in her. "What's your name?" He asked gently. She was silent for a while. Then she whispered, "Sita." Real smiled faintly. "Sita, that's a beautiful name." She shrugged lightly. "It used to mean something." There was a long pause. Then Sita looked directly at him. "You should let them take me. If you fight, they'll kill you and your crew." Real shook his head. "Not going to happen." "Why?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Real smiled sadly. "Because no one deserves to live in chains. And no one should live running forever." Sita looked at him for a long time, studying his face, his eyes. Then she said, "You're a fool." "Maybe," Reel chuckled. "But I'm a stubborn one." Suddenly, Jonah's voice crackled through the cum. "Captain, that ship trailing us, it's gaining speed. They'll catch us soon." Reel stood up quickly. He looked back at Sita. "If you know any way to help us fight them, now's the time." Sita stared at him, her expression unreadable. "If I help, they'll know I'm alive for sure." "They already know," Reel said. "And I'm not letting them take you." Sita closed her eyes for a moment, then stood up slowly. "Fine. Take me to your engine room." "What? Why?" "I can modify your warp core," she said. "I know ancient tech. I can make your ship jump further and faster, but only once." Reel smiled. "Good enough." He led her down to the engine room. Jonah stared in disbelief as Sita touched the ship's core. Strange symbols glowed faintly on her skin, and the engine responded as if it recognized her. In minutes, the ship hummed with new power. The warp drive was ready. Back on the bridge, Reel shouted, "Prepare for warp." "Punch it." The iron wind leapt forward, the stars stretching into long white lines. Behind them, the shadow ship was left far behind. They had escaped. For now, Reel looked at Sita with new respect. "You saved us." Sita's expression was soft, but sad. "I've delayed them, but they'll come again." Reel smiled. "Then we'll be ready." For the first time, Sita looked less like a prisoner and more like a fighter. She had chosen to help. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe that not all humans were the same. Some would stand. Some would stay. The ship trembled slightly as the enemy vessel hovered nearby, their weapons locked on target. Inside the iron wind, Captain Reel paced the bridge, his mind racing. He had no idea who this girl, Sita, truly was, but he knew one thing now: people were willing to kill for her. Reel left the bridge and hurried back to Sita's room. She stood by the window, watching the dark ship outside. Her silver skin glowed faintly under the room's light. She didn't seem afraid, only tired. "Sita," Reel said, "if I'm going to protect you, I need to know the truth." Sita turned to face him. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she raised her hand to her neck and brushed her fingers under her collarbone. The skin shimmered as if hiding something. Reel stepped closer. "What is that?" With a deep breath, Sita pressed her fingers into the skin near her collarbone. A hidden mark revealed itself, lines and symbols forming a delicate crest, glowing faintly with gold and blue light. Reel stared. He recognized symbols from old galactic history. His eyes widened. "That's a royal insignia," Sita nodded. "I am the last princess of the Veil Dominion. My empire was destroyed in a civil war. My people betrayed me. I was captured and sold as a slave to erase my existence." Reel was stunned. A royal princess sold as a personal slave, hidden from the galaxy. It explained her grace, her calmness, her knowledge. "But why didn't you tell me before?" he asked. "Because trust is dangerous," Sita replied. "Every time I trusted someone, they sold me to the highest bidder. I didn't think you were different." Reel clenched his jaw. "And now?" Sita's blue eyes studied him. "Now ... I don't know. But you're still here." Suddenly, the ship's comms buzzed. Jonah's voice came through. "Captain, we've got a bigger problem. The enemy ship is charging weapons. We have minutes." Reel sighed. "We can't outgun them." Sita looked at him calmly. "Then let me help." Reel frowned. "Help? You're not armed." Sita smiled faintly. "I may not have weapons, but I have knowledge. That ship chasing us, it belongs to the shadow collectors. They hunt royal bloodlines, but they rely on specific patterns to track targets." She stepped to the console. "If I modify your engine's warp signature, we can vanish before they lock weapons. Real hesitated, then nodded. Do it. Sita's hands moved swiftly across the console, fingers dancing like a musician on strings. Strange codes and symbols filled the screen, faster than anyone on the crew had ever seen. Jonah watched from the bridge feed. Captain, she's rewriting our engine's code. She knows what she's doing, Real replied. Moments later, the ship's core hummed louder, and the iron wind shook as the warp drive powered up. Now, Sita commanded. Real hit the jump command. The stars outside stretched, and the ship jumped into hyperspace just as the enemy fired. Silence filled the ship. They had escaped. Real looked at Sita, amazed. Where did you learn to do that? I wasn't just a princess, she said softly. I was trained in science, warfare, and strategy. My family believed knowledge was the only way to rule wisely. Real smiled slightly. Well, that knowledge just saved us. Sita smiled back faint, but real. For the first time, a spark of trust passed between them. Later, in the quiet of the ship, Real found Sita sitting alone, staring at the royal mark on her skin. Do you miss your home? Real asked. She nodded. Every day, but my home is gone. The people who should have protected me are dead or traitors. Real sat beside her. Then maybe you can make a new home. With people who choose to stand with you, not because of your title ... but because of who you are. Sita looked at him, her eyes soft. And what do you choose, Captain Real? He smiled. I choose to protect you, whatever it costs. She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. The warmth in her gaze said everything. Somewhere in deep space, bounty hunters, shadow collectors, and traitors still hunted her. But aboard the Iron Wind, she wasn't a slave. She wasn't a princess in chains. She was Sita, a woman with a hidden past, a powerful mind, and perhaps a future with a human who refused to let her walk alone. And the galaxy had no idea that a storm was coming. The Iron Wind sailed quietly through uncharted space. Captain Real thought they were safe for now. But deep in his mind, he knew peace never lasted long, not when a royal princess was aboard. Sita, now without chains, moved freely on the ship. The crew still watched her with caution, but some started to respect her. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried wisdom. She spent her time studying the ship's systems, teaching Real's crew new things about energy shields, engine tuning, and ancient star maps. Yet, Real noticed something. Elsella had begun to smile. Small, rare smiles, but they were there. She was no longer the silent, broken prisoner. She was becoming herself again, but danger was never far. Unseen by the Iron Wind, a small black vessel stalked them through space. Inside, bounty hunters received a message from the shadow collectors. Recover the lost Veil Princess. Dead or alive, high reward. The bounty hunters grinned. To them, it was simple, a rich prize for an easy catch. 2 days later, Real decided to dock at a lonely trade station on a small moon. They needed fuel, supplies, and information. The station looked abandoned, with rusted walls and flickering lights. As they docked, Jonah warned, Captain, this feels wrong. This place is too quiet. Real nodded but replied, we don't have much choice. Real, Sita, and 2 crew members stepped off the ship. Sita wore a cloak to hide her silver skin. They walked through the dark halls of the station, looking for the merchant quarters. Suddenly, a loud clanking noise echoed. Jonah's voice came over the comm. Captain, multiple heat signatures detected. We're not alone. Real's hand moved to his blaster. Sita, stay close. From the shadows, masked bounty hunters emerged, weapons aimed. You made it easy, Captain, one bounty hunter growled. Hand over the girl, and you might walk away alive. Real stood firm. Not happening, the lead hunter laughed. You don't even know what she's worth, do you? That's not just a slave. That's the last Veil Princess. Her head is worth more than your entire ship. Sita pulled down her hood. Her eyes glowed softly, calm even in danger. "You think you can kill me so easily?" she whispered. The bounty hunters smirked, unfazed. Then Sita raised her hand. Strange symbols glowed faintly on her skin. The station lights flickered, the walls vibrated, and a pulse of energy burst out, knocking 2 hunters off their feet. "She's using tech or magic." One shouted. Real fired his blaster, taking down another hunter. The room became a storm of flashes and noise, but there were too many. One hunter grabbed Sita, forcing her to her knees. "Stop!" the leader yelled, holding a blade to Sita's throat. "Drop your weapon or she dies." Real froze, his heart pounding. His mind raced for a plan, but then Sita did something unexpected. She whispered in an ancient tongue, and her eyes burned bright blue. A sudden wave of energy surged from her body, flinging the hunter across the room like a ragdoll. She stood up slowly, her body glowing faintly, and her voice was cold. "I am no one's prisoner." The hunters stared in fear. Real took the chance, shooting down 2 more attackers. The rest of the crew arrived, guns blazing, led by Jonah. The bounty hunters were outmatched and fled into the station's dark halls, breathing heavy. Real ran to Sita. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "I'm fine." Jonah looked at her, stunned. "What did you just do?" Sita sighed. "A gift from my bloodline. My ancestors were not just rulers, they were gifted with abilities." Jonah scratched his head. "You could have told us." Sita looked at Real. "I didn't trust you enough, now I do." Real smiled slightly. "Good, because we're going to need every advantage." As they returned to the Iron Wind, Real thought deeply. The bounty hunters would not stop. Word was out now, the last Veil Princess was alive. Sita was no longer just a mystery. She was a beacon. And that beacon was calling every hunter, collector, and killer in the galaxy. But Real didn't care, because now it wasn't just about protecting a passenger. It was about protecting someone he had started to care for. Someone who deserved her freedom, and maybe more. Back on the ship, as stars stretched before them, Real looked at Sita and said quietly, "We'll keep running if we must. But I won't let them take you, not now, not ever." Sita smiled faintly. For the first time, it was not a sad smile, but one full of hope. The war for her freedom had just begun. The Iron Wind drifted in deep space, hiding in the shadow of a dead moon. After the warp jump, they had escaped the shadow collectors, but it wouldn't last. Everyone aboard the ship knew the hunters would return. They always did, but something had changed between Real and Sita. Since Sita had saved the ship with her ancient knowledge, the crew had started seeing her differently. She was no longer just the silent slave from the auction. She was smart, powerful, and more human than they imagined, even though she wasn't human at all. Still, she kept to herself. She spent her time in the engine room or standing quietly by the observation deck, watching the stars. One evening, Real found her there again, standing in front of the wide glass window, staring at the endless blackness sprinkled with lights. "You like it here," Real said gently as he walked up beside her. Sita didn't look at him, but answered, "I was born under a sky like this, but I've never really touched it. Always moving, always running." "You're not running now," Real replied. Sita smiled faintly. "Not yet." Real looked at her silver skin glowing faintly in the dim lights, her eyes deep as the space. "Outside, you're different," he said. "Not just your powers or your bloodline, but something in you. You don't let the past break you." Sita chuckled softly. "I've been broken before, many times, but I refuse to stay broken." There was a pause between them, not awkward, but thoughtful. Then Sita asked, "Why did you really buy me, Real? You could have walked away." Real was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because when I looked at you in that auction, I didn't see a slave. I saw a person who deserved better. And I couldn't walk away from that." Sita turned her gaze to him, her expression softening. "You're the first." "The first what?" Real asked. "The first person who looked at me like I wasn't just something to own." They stood there in silence, the distance between them slowly disappearing. The hum of the ship was the only sound, but it felt peaceful. "I've never thanked you," Sita whispered. Real smiled. "You don't have to." "But I want to," she said, her eyes shining softly. Suddenly, the cum crackled with Jonah's voice. "Captain, we have a problem. In the cargo hold. You need to see this." Real sighed. "Duty calls. Go," Sita said with a small smile. "I'll be here." Real hurried to the cargo bay, where Jonah stood with 2 crew members around a terminal. "What's wrong?" Real asked. Jonah pointed to the screen. "I was checking the system logs, and someone sent a transmission when we stopped at the last station. It wasn't from you or me." Real's stomach dropped. "Who?" Jonah's face was dark. "Vec. He sent our coordinates to someone. That's how the shadow collectors found us." Real's jaw tightened. Vec was young, greedy, and careless. He must have thought he could make a fortune by selling Sita's location. "Where is he now?" Real asked. "In his bunk," Jonah replied. "Should I drag him out?" Real shook his head. "No, I'll handle it." Real walked to Vec's quarters and knocked hard. When Vec opened the door, his face turned pale seeing the captain. "You sent them our location," Real said quietly. Vec's mouth trembled. I didn't know they'd come so soon. I just thought I could sell us out," Real finished coldly. "For credits." Vec fell to his knees. "Please, Captain. I didn't want anyone to die. I was stupid." Real stared at him, his fists clenched. Part of him wanted to throw Vec out the airlock, but another part knew that wouldn't fix anything. "Stay in your room," Real said. "You don't speak to anyone. We'll drop you off at the next port. You're done here." Vec nodded, tears in his eyes. Real walked back to the observation deck. Sita was still there, waiting. "You look angry," she said softly. "One of my crew betrayed us," Real admitted. "That's why the collectors found us." Sita's eyes darkened. "That's what betrayal feels like. I know it too well." Real sighed and leaned on the window beside her. "I'm sorry, Sita. You didn't deserve any of this." She looked at him, her gaze steady. "You didn't either. Yet you're still standing with me." Real chuckled lightly. "I guess I'm stubborn." Sita smiled. "And I guess ... I'm glad you are." They stood quietly, 2 souls connected by fate, danger, and now something more, a bond neither fully understood yet, but both could feel. And in that quiet space among the stars, Sita whispered, "Thank you, Real, for my freedom." Real smiled. "You gave that to yourself, Sita. I just gave you a choice." That night, the ship sailed quietly, but something stronger than steel connected them now, a bond of freedom, trust, and a growing love between a human captain and the alien girl he had once bought, but never owned. Days passed quietly on the Iron Wind, but Captain Real knew peace was a lie. Somewhere out there, bounty hunters and collectors still searched for Sita, the last Veil Princess. Every jump through space felt like a countdown to the next attack, but what Real didn't know was that danger wasn't just outside. It was already inside his ship. One of his crew, a young man named Vec, had secretly sent a message from the trade station. He had seen the fight with the bounty hunters, seen Seta's powers, and greed poisoned his heart. The message was short but clear. "The Veil Princess is alive. She's on the Iron Wind. Reward me, and I'll give you the coordinates." Vec waited for the reply, hiding his small communicator in his bunk. He told himself it was just business. A reward like that could buy a new life, a planet of his own. He didn't care what happened to the girl. She was just ... valuable. But he didn't know the storm his betrayal had summoned. That night, Sita stood quietly on the observation deck, staring into the endless stars. Real approached her, noticing how peaceful she looked in the silence of space. You look like you belong among the stars, Real said softly. Sita smiled. Maybe because I've spent my whole life looking at them from a cage. Real stood beside her. You're not in a cage anymore. She turned to him. I know, because of you. Their eyes met, and for a moment, no words were needed. Something unspoken passed between them, trust, warmth, ... Maybe even the beginning of love. But then, the ship's alarm screamed. Jonah's voice echoed from the comm. Captain, enemy vessels inbound. 3 ships fully armed. Real and Sita ran to the bridge. The screens showed 3 black warships approaching fast, weapons already hot. How did they find us so fast? Jonah asked. Real's mind raced. Then he stared at the crew, his voice cold. Someone told them. Silence filled the bridge. Real's eyes locked onto Vec. The young man froze, sweat forming on his brow. You, Real said, stepping forward. You sent a signal. Vec's hands shook. I just wanted the reward. I didn't think they'd come this fast. Jonah grabbed him by the collar, fury on his face. You fool, you sold us out. Real pushed Jonah back. No time, we have to survive first. Sita's voice was calm but firm. We need to run. They'll chase us, Jonah warned. Then we fight, Real decided. Jonah, man the guns. Sita, can you boost our shields? Sita nodded. I'll try. As the enemy ships fired, the iron wind shook violently. Lights flickered, metal groaned, but the crew fought back. Cannons roared, lasers lit the black sky, and the ship dodged as best it could in the engine room. Sita's hands danced over the power core, her skin glowing faintly. She whispered in her ancient tongue, and the energy shields brightened, stronger than ever before. But the enemy was relentless. One shot struck hard, causing explosions in the lower decks. Real gritted his teeth. We won't last long like this. Sita's voice came through the comm. Real, I can overload the core temporarily. It will push us far enough to escape, but it's risky. Real smiled grimly. Do it. In the engine room, Sita focused, pouring her knowledge into the machines. Symbols glowed along her arms, her body almost becoming part of the ship. The engines roared louder than ever before, and with a blinding flash, the iron wind shot forward, faster than any ship should move. The stars blurred, the enemy ships vanished. Behind them, silence. They had escaped again. On the bridge, the crew cheered softly, exhausted but alive. Real slumped in his chair, relieved. Jonah dragged Vec to the captain's chair. What do we do with him? Vec trembled. Please. I didn't know they'd come so fast. I didn't mean for anyone to die. Real stared at him coldly. You betrayed us for credits. Vec dropped to his knees. Please. Don't kill me. Sita entered the bridge, her face calm but her eyes sad. Real looked at her. What should we do with him? Sita stared at Vec. I've lived my whole life with betrayal. I've seen what it does. Letting him live. That's your choice, Captain. Real thought deeply. Then he pointed to Vec. You're done here. Next port, you're off my ship. I don't kill my crew. But I don't forget betrayal. Vec nodded, tears in his eyes. As the ship sailed quietly again, Real turned to Sita. You saved us. Sita smiled faintly. We saved each other. Their eyes met again, and this time it was clear. Something was growing between them, stronger than trust, deeper than friendship. Maybe love. But Real knew one thing, for sure, the galaxy would keep coming for them. And he was ready to face it all, as long as she was by his side. The stars outside the iron wind shone brighter now, like distant promises of peace. But inside the ship, quiet moments were rare. After the last battle, repairs had begun, scars of war still fresh on the metal walls. Yet something had changed. Between Real and Sita, every look, every shared moment carried a new warmth. Not just gratitude, not just duty, but something deeper. One evening, Reel found Saida on the observation deck again. She stood without her cloak, her silver skin glowing under the soft lights, her blue eyes lost in the sea of stars. "You're always looking out there," Reel said softly as he stepped beside her. Saida smiled faintly. "Out there is freedom. Endless, untouched. I was never allowed to have that." Reel chuckled. "You have it now." She looked at him. "Do I? I'm still being hunted. Every shadow feels like a threat. Is that freedom?" Reel's smile faded. He understood her pain. But then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a simple silver chain. With a tiny ring made from ship metal. Saida looked at it, confused. "What is that?" Reel smiled. "It's a promise. Humans call it a bond, a ring. I know I can't give you a throne or a kingdom, but I can offer you something better, a life together, built on choice, not chains." Saida stared at the ring. "You want me to stay ... with you?" "I want you to stay because you want to," Reel said. "Not as a princess, not as a passenger, but as my partner ... as my wife." For a long moment, Saida said nothing. She looked at the ring then. At Reel, the human who bought her not to own her, but to free her. The man who fought for her, trusted her, even when she was silent and distant. Then, softly, she reached out and took the ring. "I never thought I'd have a choice," she whispered. "But now, I choose you." Reel's heart swelled. He laughed. Gently. "I should have brought flowers." Saida smiled. A real, warm, beautiful smile that made her glow brighter than any star outside. But before the moment could deepen, Jonah's voice came through the comm. "Captain, we're getting a transmission. Unknown origin. It's not hostile." Reel tapped his comm. "Patch it through." A hologram flickered to life. An old alien, his face lined with age, his eyes sharp. "Veil Princess. If you are hearing this, know that your people still live, scattered, hidden, waiting for you to return." Saida gasped softly. She stepped closer. The message continued. "We are building again, in secret. We need a leader. If you choose, you can come home and rebuild what was lost." Then the message ended. Reel looked at Saida. "You have a home waiting for you." Saida looked down at the ring in her hand, then back at Reel. "I had a home," she said quietly. "But now I have a future. I won't go back to sit on a throne. If my people need help, I'll guide them. But I'll do it my way." She slipped the ring onto her finger. "And I'll do it with you." Reel smiled. "Then let's build our own kingdom among the stars." Jonah chuckled over the comm. "Should I start calling her queen?" Saida laughed softly. "No crowns, no titles, just ... Saida." And with that, the iron wind powered its engines, sailing forward into the unknown. A human captain and an alien princess, now partners now. Equals now more. They weren't running anymore. They were living together.